I stood in the hallway, still holding my birthday gift, a simple hand-knitted sweater for my granddaughter, when I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. The cold wind nipped at my neck as I stepped outside, following a quiet, almost imperceptible sobbing sound. And then I saw her. Sophie, 6 years old, my little sunshine, sitting on the front steps, shivering. No coat, no gloves. Her cheeks, red and wet with tears, her tiny arms hugging herself for warmth, forgotten, or worse, abandoned. Inside, her mother, my daughter-in-law Tiffany, was laughing with her friends, holding a glass of wine, dressed like a queen at her own coronation, completely unbothered. I scooped Sophie into my arms, her little body ice-cold and trembling. As I re-entered the house, the music halted. All eyes turned to me. I stared directly at Tiffany, and then at my son, Daniel, who said nothing. And I said 5 words that made every guest lower their eyes in shame, every glass tremble in frozen silence. You don't deserve this, child. In the 61 years I'd walked this earth, I'd never spoken so boldly to anyone. That's not who I am, or at least not who I was. Franklin Turner, retired school. Principal, widower. The man who always took the high road, who believed in quiet dignity and respect above all else. The man who'd spent a decade swallowing his pride, accepting scraps of attention from his own son's family, all to maintain the fragile connection to his beloved granddaughter. The silence that followed my words felt eternal. Sophie's little arms tightened around my neck, her cold cheek pressed against mine. Tiffany recovered first, her perfect red lips curving into a dismissive smile. "Oh, please, Frank. She was just outside for a minute. Children need boundaries." She turned to her guests, wineglass raised. "He's always been so dramatic." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any knife, but it was Daniel's silence that truly wounded me. My son, my only son, stood there with a half-smile frozen on his face, caught between worlds, unwilling to stand for either his daughter or his father. "She's been out there for 20 minutes, said a voice from the corner. One of the caterers, a young woman with kind eyes. I saw her go out, but I thought someone was watching her. The room fell silent again. Tiffany's smile hardened into something ugly. "Sophie," I whispered to my granddaughter, "go upstairs and get your warmest pajamas. Pack your backpack with whatever you want to bring to Grandpa's house." Sophie nodded against my shoulder, and I set her down gently. She scurried up the grand staircase, disappearing from view, but not before throwing one last fearful glance at her mother. "You can't just take her," Tiffany hissed, stepping closer, the scent of expensive perfume and wine heavy around her. "This is ridiculous. It's your birthday dinner. We've gone to all this trouble." Trouble? I looked around the room for the first time. Really looked. No birthday banner with my name. A generic store-bought cake in the corner, still in its plastic container. Tiffany's friends, not mine. Jazz music I never liked. This isn't my party. I don't even know half these people. Daniel finally found his voice. "Dad, let's talk about this later. You're embarrassing us." Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally broke. "Embarrassing you?" My voice was quiet, but carried across the now silent room. "Your daughter was sitting alone in 20-degree weather without a coat, Daniel. She could have gotten frostbite. Hypothermia. While you were in here, doing what exactly? Networking? Impressing your wife's friends?" A woman in an expensive-looking dress cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should go." "No," I said firmly. "Stay. Enjoy your party. I'm taking Sophie with me tonight. We can discuss arrangements tomorrow." Tiffany's face contorted with rage. "Arrangements? There are no arrangements to discuss. You can't just... I can call Child Protective Services right now if you'd prefer," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let them decide if leaving a 6-year-old alone outside in freezing temperatures constitutes neglect." The threat hung in the air. Tiffany's face paled. Sophie came downstairs then, wearing her unicorn backpack and clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear I'd given her when she was born. She'd changed into her warmest clothes, mismatched but practical. So much like her grandmother, my late wife Martha, practical to the core. Daniel stepped forward, finally showing some parental concern. "Sophie, honey, you don't have to go with Grandpa. You can stay home with Mommy and Daddy." Sophie looked at him, then at Tiffany, then back at me. Without a word, she walked to my side and slipped her small hand into mine. The choice had been made. "I'll bring her back tomorrow afternoon," I said, helping Sophie into her coat, which had been hanging in the closet all along. We can talk then, when there aren't an audience and alcohol involved. As we walked to the door, Sophie stopped and looked back at the room full of strangers who had witnessed this family fracture. In her sweet, clear voice, she said something that broke my heart all over again. Grandpa always comes to get me when I'm sad. We left then, walking out into the cold night, hand in hand. In my rearview mirror, I could see Daniel standing in the doorway, watching us drive away. He didn't wave, he didn't call out, he just watched. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The drive to my house was quiet. Sophie sat in the back seat, buckled safely in her booster, clutching her teddy bear and staring out the window at the falling snow. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, searching for words to comfort her, to explain what had happened back there without damaging her image of her parents. "Are you hungry, Sunshine?" I finally asked as we pulled into the driveway of my modest two-bedroom home, the house where I'd raised Daniel and his sister Elena, the house where Martha had died, the house that Tiffany had once called quaint, with that slight curl of her lip that said what she really meant was inadequate. Sophie nodded. "Can we have pancakes for dinner, Grandpa?" "Pancakes it is." I smiled, relief washing over me. 6 years old and already she knew how to move forward, how to find comfort in small pleasures. "With chocolate chips?" Her first real smile of the evening emerged. "And bananas?" "Absolutely. Chocolate chips and bananas. Your grandma's special recipe." Inside, Sophie immediately claimed her spot on the couch, the corner she always gravitated to during her visits. I turned up the heat and found her a blanket, tucking it around her legs while she turned on the old television, finding her favorite cartoon channel with practiced ease. As I mixed pancake batter in the kitchen, memories washed over me like waves. How had things come to this? When had my son, my kind, thoughtful boy, become this silent enabler of cruelty? When had I become so afraid of losing access to my granddaughter that I'd tolerated being treated like an outsider in my own family? The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. "Daniel," I answered, keeping my voice low so Sophie wouldn't hear. "Dad?" His voice sounded strained. "This has gotten out of hand. You need to bring Sophie back." "Is Tiffany standing right next to you?" I asked. A pause. "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point, Daniel." I poured batter onto the hot griddle, watching it bubble. "Your daughter was outside in freezing weather while you and your wife entertained guests who don't even know my name, at what was supposed to be my birthday dinner. She was only out there for a few minutes. 20 minutes. A witness confirmed it. 20 minutes, Daniel. Do you know what can happen to a child in 20 minutes of exposure to 20-degree weather?" Silence. "Bring her back, Dad." His voice hardened. "Or we'll come get her." The threat hung in the air, but I was past being intimidated. "She's safe. She's warm. She's about to eat dinner. You can come tomorrow at noon, as I said. We'll talk then. Just us adults. If you don't bring her back tonight, Tiffany wants to call the police." I almost laughed. "And tell them what? That the child they neglected is safely with her grandfather?" "Go ahead. I've got a young woman who witnessed Sophie sitting outside, crying and freezing. I've got neighbors who've seen me picking Sophie up from school when Tiffany forgets. I've got years of documentation, Daniel. Years of being the backup parent when you two were too busy." Another long silence. Then quieter. "Dad, please. You know how Tiffany gets." And there. It was. The admission wrapped in a plea. He knew. He'd always known. "Yes, Daniel, I do know how Tiffany gets. The question is, why have you allowed it for so long?" "It's complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's actually very simple. Your daughter deserves better. From both of you." I could hear Tiffany's voice in the background, demanding to know what I was saying. "Noon tomorrow, Daniel. Sophie stays with me tonight." I hung up before he could respond, turning my attention back to the pancakes, which were now perfectly golden brown. I flipped them, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Was that Daddy?" Sophie asked, suddenly appearing in the doorway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. "Yes, Sunshine. He wanted to make sure you're okay." She nodded thoughtfully. "Is he mad at you?" I considered lying, but I'd never lied to Sophie. "A little bit, but sometimes adults disagree because they both think they're doing what's best. Mommy puts me outside when I cry too much," she said matter-of-factly, climbing onto a kitchen stool. "She says it helps me be stronger, but it's cold and I get scared of the dark." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I set down my spatula, and knelt in front of her, looking into those innocent blue eyes. Sophie, listen to me. No one should ever put you outside when you're upset. Ever. Being sad or crying is not bad. It's just a feeling, like being happy or excited. But Mommy says Turner women don't cry. We're too strong for that. I swallowed hard. Your grandmother cried. She was the strongest person I ever knew, and she cried when she was sad, or even when she was very happy. And that was beautiful, not weak. Sophie considered this new information carefully. Did Daddy cry when he was little? All the time, I said, smiling at the memory. When he fell off his bike, when his favorite team lost, when your Aunt Elena broke his Lego spaceship. This made Sophie giggle, the sound like music in the quiet kitchen. I can't imagine Daddy crying. People change, I said, turning back to rescue our pancakes. Sometimes they forget who they used to be. As we sat down to our breakfast for dinner, Sophie dousing her pancakes in maple syrup, I couldn't help but wonder if this night, this stand I'd finally taken, would change anything, or if I'd just made everything worse. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Daniel, but from Elena, my daughter who had distanced herself years ago after her own falling out with Tiffany. Heard what happened. About time, Dad. Call me tomorrow. Love you. And for the first time that night, I felt something like hope. Morning arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and 3 missed calls from Daniel. I let them go to voicemail while I made breakfast for Sophie, who had slept soundly through the night in the small bedroom that used to be Elena's. I'd kept it ready for her visits, with colorful bedding and a bookshelf full of stories we read together. A sanctuary from whatever was happening in that cold mansion her parents called home. Grandpa, can we build a snowman? Sophie asked, her face bright with excitement as she peered out the window at the transformed backyard. After breakfast, I promised, setting a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. And after we call your Aunt Elena. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? Mommy says we're not supposed to talk to Aunt Elena. The casual way she said it, as if being forbidden contact with her aunt was perfectly normal, made my stomach tighten. How much more had Tiffany isolated this child? How many other family connections had been severed? Your Aunt Elena loves you very much, I said carefully, and she'd like to talk to you. After breakfast, I dialed Elena's number on speakerphone. My daughter answered on the first ring. Dad, I've been waiting for your call. Is Sophie with you? I'm here, Aunt Elena, Sophie called out, pressing closer to the phone. Elena's voice softened. Hey, Pumpkin! Oh my! Goodness, you sound so grown up. I haven't seen you since you were 4. I'm 6 now, Sophie announced proudly. And I lost 2 teeth. Their conversation continued, years of separation dissolving in the magic way that children have of picking up exactly where they left off. While they chatted, I checked my voicemails. Daniel's messages grew increasingly tense. The first was conciliatory, almost apologetic. The second was firmer, mentioning Tiffany's extreme distress. The third contained a thinly veiled threat about consulting their lawyer. I sighed, deleting the messages. Daniel had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. But somewhere along the way, peacekeeping had transformed into enabling. His desire to keep everyone happy, particularly Tiffany, had allowed the slow erosion of what our family once was. After Sophie finished talking with Elena, we bundled up and headed into the backyard. The snow was perfect for building, wet enough to pack, but not too heavy. Sophie's laughter as we rolled snowballs across the yard felt like medicine for my weary soul. Grandpa, why don't you come to our house more? She asked, suddenly, her small hands patting snow onto what would become the snowman's middle section. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about how things should be. Your mom and I, we don't always see eye to eye. Is it because you're not fancy enough? Sophie asked with the devastating directness of a child. Mommy says you don't fit in with their friends. The hurt must have shown on my face because Sophie quickly added, but I think you're perfect just how you are. I swallowed hard. Thank you, sunshine. That means everything to me. We finished our snowman in companionable silence, giving him a carrot nose and button eyes. Sophie named him Mr. Buttons and insisted on using my scarf to keep him warm. At precisely noon, a sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. Daniel stepped out, alone. Daddy! Sophie ran toward him, arms outstretched. He scooped her up, holding her tight, his eyes closing briefly in what looked like relief. Over her shoulder, he met my gaze with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with resentment, perhaps. Why don't you go inside and get your things, sweetie? He suggested, setting her down. I need to talk to Grandpa. For a minute. Once Sophie was inside, Daniel's facade cracked. You had no right to take her like that. And you had no right to let your wife leave her outside in freezing temperatures. I countered, keeping my voice level. Or to let her ban Sophie from seeing her aunt. Or to throw away the birthday cards she makes for me. Yes, Sophie told me about that. Daniel flinched. It's not that simple? Dad. Enlighten me then. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that for a moment I saw the boy he had been. Tiffany comes from money. Old money. There are expectations, ways things are done. Her family has connections that have helped my career, my standing in the community. And that's worth your daughter's well-being? Your family relationships? You don't understand the pressure? I understand choosing comfort over courage, I interrupted. I understand it because I've been doing it too. Keeping quiet, accepting scraps of time with Sophie, pretending it doesn't hurt when your wife introduces me as Daniel's dad instead of Grandpa Frank. I've been a coward, Daniel, and so have you. His face flushed. That's not fair. No, it isn't. I agreed. None of this is fair, especially not to Sophie. Sophie emerged from the house, backpack in hand, Mr. Buttons visible through the window behind her, standing sentinel in the snowy yard. I'm ready, Daddy. Daniel nodded, some internal struggle playing out across his features. Go wait in the car for a minute, okay? Once she was settled in the SUV, Daniel turned back to me. Tiffany wants to restrict your visits. She says you're undermining her parenting. Is that what she calls it? Parenting? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. What does she call leaving a child outside as punishment? Character building? Daniel's silence was damning. I've looked the other way for too long, I continued. We both have. If you try to keep me from seeing Sophie, I will fight you with everything I have. I have documentation, Daniel. Times I've picked her up when you both forgot. Photos of her at my house when you were too busy for her on weekends. I have the names of teachers who've called me because they couldn't reach either of you. My son's face paled. You would take us to court. To protect Sophie? In a heartbeat. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or the recognition of a boundary long overdue. I'll talk to Tiffany, he said finally. Try to make her understand. Do more than try, I said firmly. And Daniel, call your sister. It's time to heal that wound too. He nodded once, a small concession but a start, before walking to the car. I watched them drive away, Sophie's small hand waving from the window until they turned the corner. Inside, I found my phone ringing again. Elena. How did it go? She asked without preamble. About as well as could be expected. I sighed, suddenly exhausted. He's taking Sophie home. And you let him? He's her father, Elena. I can't just keep her. No, but you could fight harder, she insisted. You could. I am fighting, I interrupted gently. Just not with fists or threats. Sophie needs her. Father to be better. Not for her grandfather to tear her family apart. Elena was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than I am, Dad. If it were me, it's not you, I reminded her. And it's not about being better. It's about what Sophie needs. And what do you need? My daughter asked softly. After all these years of putting everyone else first? The question caught me off guard. What did I need? It had been so long since I'd even considered the question. I need to know I did right by the people I love, I answered finally. That's all I've ever needed. 3 days passed without word from Daniel or Sophie. I called twice, leaving messages that went unreturned. The silence felt ominous, a storm gathering on the horizon. I busied myself with household projects, trying not to watch the clock or jump each time the phone rang. On the 4th day, a knock at the door broke the quiet afternoon. I opened it to find Elena standing on my porch, suitcase in hand, her dark hair, so like her mother's, windblown from the February chill. Surprise, she said with a tentative smile. I took some time off work. I pulled her into a tight embrace, emotion catching in my throat. My daughter had been gone for nearly 3 years, living in Chicago, building her career as a journalist, keeping her distance from the family drama that had wounded her so deeply. You didn't have to come all this way, I said, even as relief washed over me. Yes, I did. She stepped inside, surveying the familiar surroundings with a nostalgic smile. Some things need to be done in person. Over coffee at the kitchen table, Martha's old ceramic mugs that I'd never had the heart to replace. Elena filled me in on her life. Her promotion at the newspaper, her new apartment, the man she'd been seeing for the past year, someone solid and kind named James. You should have told me, I said, feeling the familiar ache of missed milestones. I wanted to, she admitted, but every conversation somehow circled back to Daniel and Tiffany and how I needed to make amends. I couldn't keep hearing that, Dad. Not when I wasn't the one who cut ties. The memory of those conversations made me wince. How many times had I urged Elena to be the bigger person, to reach out to her brother despite the cruel words that had been exchanged, all in the name of family peace, regardless of where the blame truly lay. I'm sorry, I said simply. I was wrong. Elena's eyes widened slightly. That might be the first time I've heard you say that. Then I'm sorry for that too, I replied with a rueful smile. Your mother would have knocked some sense into me years ago. Mom always did see through people's facades, Elena agreed, a hint of sadness in her voice. She would have had Tiffany's number from day one. We spent the afternoon reminiscing, carefully at first, then with increasing warmth as old hurts gave way to fond memories. Elena had always been the truth-teller in the family, unafraid to name the reality others preferred to ignore. It was what had made her a good journalist, and what had ultimately driven the wedge between her and Daniel when she'd confronted him about Tiffany's controlling behavior. As evening approached, Elena asked the question I'd been dreading. Have you heard anything from them about Sophie? I shook my head. Nothing since Daniel took her home. That's not a good sign, she said, brow furrowing. They're closing ranks. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the living room wall as a car pulled into the driveway. We both tensed, moving to the window. Daniel's SUV. I'll go upstairs, Elena offered immediately, rising from her chair. No. I placed a hand on her arm. Stay. It's time we stopped tiptoeing around the truth. Daniel looked startled when I opened the door to find him on the porch, Sophie's small hand in his. His surprise doubled when he spotted Elena standing behind me. Elena? His voice carried a mixture of shock and wariness. Hello, little brother, she said, her tone carefully neutral. It's been a while. Sophie broke the tension, pulling free from her father's grip and rushing forward to hug first me, then Elena. You're both here. It's like a party. Daniel remained frozen on the threshold, clearly debating whether to come in or retreat. Finally, with a small sigh, he stepped inside. Sophie wanted to see you, he explained, addressing me while carefully avoiding Elena's gaze. She's been asking every day. I missed you, Grandpa, Sophie confirmed, her face serious. And I was worried about Mr. Buttons. Is he still in the yard? He is, I assured her, grateful for the innocence of her concerns. Though his carrot nose got nibbled by a rabbit. This made her giggle, the sound warming the chilly atmosphere of the room. Can I go see him? She asked eagerly. It's getting dark, sweetie, Daniel began, but I interrupted. I've got flashlights. We can all go check on him. Daniel hesitated, then nodded, the ghost of his younger, less burdened self visible in the small smile he offered his daughter. Sure, let's do that. Out in the yard, Sophie ran ahead to inspect the slightly lopsided snowman, while the three adults lingered a few paces behind, an island of unresolved tension in the peaceful, snow-covered landscape. How have you been, Elena? Daniel finally asked, his voice stiff, but making the effort. Better than you, from the looks of it, she replied, but there was no bite to her words. What's going on, Daniel? Really? He glanced at Sophie, ensuring she was out of earshot, before responding. Tiffany's parents are visiting. They've been difficult, especially her father. He has strong ideas about how children should be raised. And those ideas include leaving a child out in the cold? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Daniel flinched. That was Tiffany's idea. She said her father used to do the same to her, to teach self-reliance. Elena and I exchanged a look of horror. That's not teaching self-reliance, Elena said firmly. That's abuse, Daniel. And now she's perpetuating it with Sophie. I know, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I know it's wrong. I don't know how to fix any of this. In the glow of the flashlight, watching Sophie happily replacing Mr. Button's missing nose with a pine cone, I saw my son, clearly, for perhaps the first time in years. Not as the successful lawyer with the perfect life, but as a man trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, afraid to lose what he had, but increasingly aware of the cost. You start by putting your daughter first, I said gently. Everything else follows from there. The kitchen was warm and bright as we sat around the old wooden table, steam rising from mugs of hot chocolate. Sophie, pink-cheeked from the cold, was happily explaining to Elena how she'd learned to read chapter books, while Daniel sat quietly, looking both out of place and strangely at home. "Can I stay for dinner, Daddy?" Sophie asked suddenly, turning to Daniel with hopeful eyes. He hesitated, glancing at his watch. "I don't know, sweetie. Your mom is expecting us back. Please?" She persisted. "Grandpa makes the best spaghetti, and I want to show Aunt Elena my books." The mention of books lit up Sophie's face. Reading had always been our special connection, natural for a retired school principal. I'd taught her letters before she could properly talk, just as I'd done with Daniel and Elena decades earlier. Daniel looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. "You're both welcome to stay," I said. "There's plenty of food." A war of emotions played across my son's face, longing for the easy comfort of family, fear of the consequences at home. "I should call Tiffany first." He stepped into the living room to make the call, his voice too low to hear. Sophie took advantage of his absence to lean toward Elena conspiratorially. "Mommy doesn't know I'm here," she whispered. "Daddy said we were going to the bookstore." Elena and I exchanged glances. The deception spoke volumes about what was happening in their household. Daniel returned, his expression carefully neutral. "We can stay for dinner," Sophie cheered, while I tried to read between the lines of what must have been a difficult conversation. "Everything okay?" "Tiffany's at some charity committee meeting," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "She won't be home until later." The unspoken truth hung in the air. He hadn't told her where they really were. Dinner was a strange blend of nostalgia and tension. Sophie chattered happily, unaware of the currents flowing beneath the surface. Elena shared stories of her life in Chicago, carefully edited to leave out any hint of the estrangement that had kept her away. Daniel mostly listened, occasionally joining in with a memory or question, like someone testing thin ice. As I served dessert, apple pie from the local bakery, Daniel's phone buzzed insistently. He checked it, his face draining of color. "We need to go," he said, standing abruptly. "Sophie, get your coat." "But I'm not finished with my pie," she protested. "Now, Sophie." His voice brooked no argument. Elena frowned. "What's wrong?" "Tiffany's home early," he said, helping Sophie into her coat with hurried movements. "She tried calling me, and I didn't answer." "So?" Elena challenged. "You're having dinner with your family. That's not a crime." Daniel's laugh was hollow. "You don't understand." "No, I don't," Elena said, rising from her chair. "I don't understand how you let someone control you like this. The Daniel I grew up with would never—" "That's enough, Elena," I interrupted, seeing the panic in Daniel's eyes. "Go ahead, Daniel. We'll see you soon, Sophie." Sophie hugged me tightly, then Elena. "Next time, can we have a sleepover?" "We'll see," Daniel said, already moving toward the door. "Thanks for dinner, Dad." After they left, Elena paced the kitchen, furious. "This is insane. He's a grown man, sneaking around like a teenager past curfew. And for what? Because his wife doesn't want Sophie to have a relationship with us? It's more complicated than that," I said, though I shared her frustration. "Is it?" Elena challenged. "Or have we just been making excuses for him for years because it's easier than admitting he's trapped in a controlling relationship?" I couldn't argue with that. The signs had been there for years. Daniel's gradual withdrawal from family events, his constant checking in with Tiffany, the way he monitored his words around her. I'd attributed it to the natural evolution of a marriage, to his desire to build his own family unit. But seen through Elena's clear eyes, the pattern was disturbing. "What can we do?" I asked, feeling the weight of years of silent complicity. "We can stop pretending this is normal," she said firmly, "and we can be here for Sophie and for Daniel when he's ready to see the reality of his situation." Later that night, after Elena had gone to bed in her old room, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the familiar shadows of the house where I'd raised my children, where Martha and I had built our life together. What would she think of the mess our family had become? My phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. "I'm sorry about tonight. Tiffany was upset. Things got heated." I typed back, "Are you and Sophie okay?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, "Sophie's fine. She's asleep." But he hadn't answered about himself. I waited, watching the screen, but no more messages came through. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying years of interactions with Tiffany and Daniel, the subtle put-downs, the canceled plans, the way Sophie was being molded into a miniature version of her mother, taught to suppress her emotions, to value appearance over authenticity. I'd failed them all by staying silent for so long. Morning brought a renewed sense of purpose and an unexpected visitor. I opened the door to find a harried-looking young woman on my porch, her professional attire at odds with her anxious expression. "Mr. Turner, I'm Melissa Winters. I was the caterer at your birthday dinner the other night." She spoke quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to talk to you. About what I saw, about your granddaughter." I invited her in, offering coffee which she accepted gratefully. Elena joined us, her journalist instincts clearly triggered by the unexpected visitor. "I've worked for the Hartleys, Tiffany's parents, for years," Melissa explained, warming her hands around the coffee mug. "I've catered dozens of their events, including at your son's house. What happened with Sophie that night? It wasn't the first time." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "Tiffany has a pattern," she said, her voice dropping despite us being alone in the house. "When Sophie cries or doesn't behave exactly as expected, she gets sent outside, or to the basement, or sometimes locked in the coat closet. The staff, we've all seen it, but everyone's afraid to say anything because the Hartleys are so powerful in the community." Elena leaned forward, her expression grave. "Why are you telling us this now?" Melissa bit her lip. "Because after what happened at the party, Mrs. Hartley, Tiffany's mother, fired me. Said I was disloyal for confirming that Sophie had been outside. And without that income," she shrugged helplessly. "I have student loans, but more. Importantly, I couldn't live with myself if something happened to that little girl and I hadn't spoken up. I felt physically ill. Have you witnessed any other forms of mistreatment?" "Nothing physical," she said quickly. "It's more psychological. The constant criticism, the impossibly high standards. Sophie's not allowed to make noise or mess or show any negative emotions. She's treated like a doll, not a child." "Would you be willing to put this in writing?" Elena asked, her reporter's notebook already in hand. "As a sworn statement?" Melissa hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, for Sophie's sake." As Elena took down Melissa's statement, I stared out the window at the melting snowman in the yard, Mr. Buttons listing slightly to one side, his pinecone nose still firmly in place. Sophie had insisted we name him, give him a story, a personality. Despite everything, she still saw the world with wonder and imagination. I intended to make sure she never lost that gift. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Elena extended her stay, working remotely from my dining room table while helping me navigate the complex terrain of family law and child welfare. We consulted with a lawyer, a former colleague of mine who specialized in family cases, and began building a case file, collecting every scrap of evidence of the troubling pattern in Sophie's home life. Photos of Sophie at my house on days when her parents had forgotten to pick her up from school. Text messages from Daniel asking if I could take her for the weekend because Tiffany had important social engagements. Notes from Sophie's teachers expressing concern about her anxiety and fear of making mistakes. And now, Melissa's sworn statement about what she had witnessed. Through it all, I wavered between determination and doubt. Was I overstepping? Destroying what remained of my relationship with my son? But then I would remember Sophie, shivering on those front steps, her little face wet with tears, and my resolve would harden again. Daniel called once, his voice tense, to say that Sophie had been asking about me. Could she visit that weekend? I agreed immediately, hope flaring that perhaps he was beginning to see the situation more clearly. Saturday morning brought another round of snow, and Sophie's excited footsteps on the porch. To my surprise, Daniel came in rather than dropping her off, accepting the offer of coffee, settling into the kitchen with an air of exhausted relief. Elena was out meeting her old high school friend, a deliberate choice to give Daniel space without the additional tension of their still fragile reconciliation. "How have you been?" I asked carefully, watching him stir sugar into his coffee with mechanical precision. "Honestly?" He looked up, dark circles under his eyes. "Not great, Dad." Sophie had already disappeared into the living room, turning on the television to find her favorite cartoon channel, giving us a rare moment of adult conversation. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, trying not to sound accusatory. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that always signaled his distress. Things with Tiffany have been intense. After what happened at the birthday dinner, her parents have been practically living at our house, monitoring everything. Her father keeps talking about how Sophie needs proper discipline and structure. He criticizes everything I do as a parent. And what does Tiffany say? She agrees with him, Daniel said flatly. She always does. Her whole life has been about meeting his impossible standards. Now she's doing the same thing to Sophie. It was the most insight he'd ever offered into his marriage, a crack in the perfect facade he'd maintained for years. Daniel, I said gently, what happened the other night? When Tiffany found out you were here with Sophie? He flinched slightly. She was angry, said I was undermining her, that I was choosing you over our family. And were there consequences? For you or Sophie? His hesitation told me everything. She made Sophie return all the books you've given her, said they were filling her head with nonsense. The casual cruelty of it, punishing a child by taking away her books, made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. And for you? Let's just say I've been sleeping in the guest room, he said, with a forced laugh. It's fine. It'll blow over. It always does. I studied my son, this man who had once been so confident and kind, now diminished by years of emotional manipulation. Does it? Or does it just go underground until the next time you step out of line? His silence was answer enough. You know this isn't healthy, right? I pressed, keeping my voice low. Not for you, and certainly not for Sophie. What am I supposed to do, Dad? Frustration edged his words. Leave? Tear apart our family? Fight a custody battle I would probably lose? The Hartleys have connections everywhere. Judges, lawyers, child welfare officials. They would destroy me. Or they would find themselves facing someone who isn't intimidated by their money or influence. I countered. Someone who has evidence of a pattern of emotional abuse. Daniel's head snapped up. Evidence? What are you talking about? Before I could answer, Sophie bounded into the kitchen, her cartoon apparently finished. Can we make cookies, Grandpa? The ones with the chocolate chunks? Of course we can, Sunshine, I said, grateful for the interruption. This conversation with Daniel needed to happen, but not with Sophie in earshot. Why don't you go wash your hands and I'll get the ingredients ready? Once she'd skipped off to the bathroom, Daniel leaned forward. Dad, what evidence? What have you been doing? Protecting my granddaughter, I said simply. The way I should have been protecting you and Elena from the beginning, by not looking the other way when something is clearly wrong. Conflict played across his features, defensive anger warring with the recognition of truth. Before he could respond, Sophie returned, her face alight with the simple joy of making cookies with her grandfather. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of domestic normalcy, measuring flour, cracking eggs, Sophie's delight at being allowed to stir the chocolate chunks into the dough herself. Daniel watched us, something like longing in his eyes, occasionally joining in, but mostly just observing, as if seeing a version of family life that had become foreign to him. When the timer dinged and the first batch emerged from the oven, golden and fragrant, Sophie clapped her hands in excitement. They're perfect! Can I take some home for Mommy? Daniel and I exchanged glances, a world of unspoken complexity in that simple question. Of course you can, sweetie, I said, finding a small container in the cupboard. We'll pack some up for her. She likes things that are perfect, Sophie confided, carefully selecting the most symmetrical cookies. If they're broken or too dark, she won't want them. The innocent comment landed like a stone in my stomach. Even in this small act of generosity, Sophie was navigating her mother's impossible standards. As they prepared to leave, Sophie's pockets full of cookie contraband for later, Daniel lingered on the porch, sending her to the car ahead of him. Dad, he began, his voice low and urgent. I'm not blind to what's happening. I just don't know how to fix it without making everything worse. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension knotted there. Sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better, but you don't have to do it alone. I don't want to lose Sophie, he whispered, real fear in his eyes. Then fight for her, I said firmly. Fight for the father she deserves to have. As their car pulled away, I wondered if my words had made any difference, or if the patterns of years were too deeply entrenched to change. I was still standing there when Elena's car pulled into the driveway, her expression serious as she hurried up the walk. What's wrong? I asked, immediately concerned. I just got a call from Melissa, she said, her voice tight with urgency. She heard from one of the housekeepers at Daniel's place. Tiffany's parents are taking Sophie to their estate in Vermont next week. They're talking about enrolling her in some exclusive boarding school there, starting immediately. My blood ran cold. They can't do that without Daniel's consent. Elena's expression was grim. Apparently, they already have it. Daniel wouldn't agree to that, I said, but doubt crept into my voice. How well did I really know my son anymore? The man who had once been so full of laughter and independence had become a shadow, bending to Tiffany's will at every turn. Maybe he didn't have a choice, Elena suggested, pacing the living room. Or maybe he doesn't even know the full plan. Melissa said the housekeeper overheard Tiffany's parents discussing it when they thought no one was around. I sank into my armchair, mind racing. We need to talk to Daniel directly. No accusations, just information. And if it's true? Elena asked, her journalist's mind already 3 steps ahead. If they're planning to ship Sophie off to some cold, strict boarding school at 6 years old, then we move forward with what we've been building, I said, a calm certainty settling over me. The documentation, Melissa's statement, everything. We go to family services. That could tear the family apart completely, Elena warned, though I could see she wasn't disagreeing. The family is already torn, I replied softly. We're just finally acknowledging the rip. I tried calling Daniel immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back, careful to keep my tone casual. No need to raise alarms yet. The call came at midnight, waking me from a fitful sleep. Daniel's voice was hushed, strained. Dad, I can't talk long. Daniel, is everything okay? I've been trying to reach you all day. A pause, filled with the static of secrets. Not really. Look, I need to ask you something important. If things got complicated, would you be able to take Sophie? Just temporarily? My heart raced. Of course. Anytime. What's happening, son? I can't explain now. He whispered. But I need to know she has somewhere safe to go. Someone who loves her unconditionally. Daniel, we've heard something concerning about Sophie being sent to boarding school in Vermont. His sharp intake of breath confirmed it. How did you? Never mind. Yes, Tiffany's parents are insisting. They say she needs proper discipline and structure that we're not providing. Tiffany agrees with them. She always does. And you? I pressed gently. What do you want for your daughter? The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, his voice returned, so quiet I had to strain to hear. I want her to be happy, to feel safe, to know she's loved no matter what. Another pause. The things I had growing up, the things I've failed to give her. It's not too late, I said, hope flaring. Daniel, whatever you're planning. I have to go, he interrupted urgently. She's coming. Just be ready. For Sophie. The line went dead. I sat up the rest of the night, alternating between anxiety and a strange, calm certainty that something significant was shifting. Elena found me at dawn, still in my armchair, staring out at the lightening sky. You look like you haven't slept, she observed, handing me a cup of coffee. Daniel called. He knows about the boarding school plan, and I think he's planning something. I shared the cryptic conversation, watching Elena's expression shift from concern to cautious hope. Do you think he's finally standing up to them? She asked. I don't know, but he asked if we could take Sophie if things got complicated, and he sounded different, more like the old Daniel. We spent the day in tense anticipation, jumping at every sound, checking our phones obsessively. I called the lawyer again, updating him on the developments, ensuring all our paperwork was in order if we needed to move quickly. The doorbell rang at dusk. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, Sophie beside him, both of them, carrying small suitcases. Behind them, Daniel's car sat in the driveway, packed to the roof with boxes and bags. Can we come in? He asked simply. I stepped aside wordlessly, trying to process what I was seeing. Sophie bounded in, her face brightening at the sight of Elena, who immediately enveloped her in a hug. Aunt Elena, are you still having a sleepover at Grandpa's? I sure am, Pumpkin. Are you joining us? Sophie looked up at her father, uncertainty clouding her features for the first time. Are we, Daddy? Daniel knelt down to her level, his voice gentle but firm. Remember what we talked about in the car? About how we're going to stay with Grandpa for a little while until Daddy figures some things out. Sophie nodded solemnly. Because Mommy and Grandpa Hartley are being mean. Daniel winced slightly at her blunt assessment, but didn't contradict her. Because we need some time to think about what's best for our family, and Grandpa's house is a safe place to do that. What about Mommy? Sophie asked, her voice small. Is she coming too? Daniel exchanged a glance with me over her head. No, sweetheart. Mommy is staying at our house. Sophie considered this, then nodded again, apparently satisfied. Can I go put my bunny in Elena's room? That's where I sleep, right? Of course, Elena said, taking her hand. Let's go get you settled. Once they'd disappeared upstairs, Daniel seemed to deflate, sinking onto the couch, his face in his hands. I left, he said simply. I took Sophie and I left. I sat beside him, waiting, giving him space to explain in his own time. They had it all planned out, he continued, his voice hollow. The boarding school, the strict regimen, separating her from negative influences. Meaning you, by the way. When I objected, Tiffany's father took me aside and explained how it would be handled. How judges in the family court were golf buddies of his. How he could make sure I never saw Sophie again if I didn't cooperate. So you took her and ran? I asked, trying to keep the alarm from my voice. Daniel, is this legal? He looked up then, a flash of the old determination in his eyes. I'm her father. I have equal custody rights. I haven't violated any court orders because there aren't any. Not yet, anyway. But Tiffany will come after you, I said, stating the obvious. I'm counting on it, he replied, and for the first time, I noticed the briefcase beside him. He opened it, revealing stacks of files and a laptop, because I'm going after her too, and I've got evidence she doesn't know about. What kind of evidence? Financial irregularities in her father's company, for starters. Emails about managing Sophie's behavior that no family court judge would approve of, golf buddy or not. And videos from the nanny cam in Sophie's room that Tiffany doesn't know I installed after the night of your birthday dinner. I stared at my son in disbelief. The passive, conflict-avoidant man of recent years seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone with clear eyes and a steady purpose. I've been building my own case, he explained. Ever since that night when you found Sophie outside. It was like waking up from a fog, seeing clearly for the first time in years what was happening in my own home. What do you need from us? I asked, determined to support whatever difficult path lay ahead. A safe place for Sophie while I deal with the legal battle that's coming, and... He hesitated, vulnerability crossing his face. A family. The real kind. The kind that tells the truth and... loves anyway. I pulled my son into an embrace, feeling the trembling in his shoulders, the release of years of tension. You've always had that, I whispered. Always. The storm broke the next morning, just as we'd anticipated. Tiffany arrived with her parents and their lawyer, demanding entrance, threatening police involvement if Sophie wasn't returned immediately. I stood on the porch, facing them calmly. Daniel and Sophie are here by choice. Daniel has equal custody rights. Unless you have a court order stating otherwise, they're free to stay as long as they wish. This is kidnapping, Tiffany's father blustered, his face reddening. We'll have you all arrested. No, Mr. Hartley, it isn't, came a voice from behind me. Daniel had appeared in the doorway, our lawyer beside him. But we can certainly discuss custody arrangements through proper legal channels. The confrontation moved to the living room, Sophie safely upstairs with Elena, watching movies with the volume turned up to mask the tension below. Tiffany's veneer of sophistication cracked quickly under pressure, her carefully manicured nails digging into the leather of her designer handbag. You can't do this, Daniel. You can't just take my daughter and walk out. Our daughter, Daniel corrected quietly. And I'm not keeping her from you. I'm protecting her from an environment that's become emotionally harmful. Harmful? Tiffany laughed, the sound brittle and false. Because we have standards? Because we expect proper behavior? Because you lock a 6-year-old outside in freezing weather when she cries, Daniel replied evenly. Because you put her in dark closets when she makes noise. Because you're trying to ship her off to boarding school to make her more disciplined before she's even lost all her baby teeth. The Hartleys exchanged glances, a flash of uncertainty crossing their features. We have documentation, our lawyer added, placing a folder on the coffee table. Witness statements, school reports noting concerning behaviors, and videos from Sophie's room showing punishment methods that family services would find very interesting. The color drained from Tiffany's face. You were spying on me? In my own home? I was protecting our daughter, Daniel said simply. Something I should have done much sooner. The meeting ended in a temporary stalemate. No one was arrested. Sophie remained with us. The lawyers agreed to work out a temporary custody arrangement while the evidence was reviewed. A small victory that felt enormous. That night, after Sophie had been tucked into bed with extra stories and reassurances, the adults gathered in the kitchen, emotionally drained but resolute. What happens now? Elena asked, nursing a cup of tea. We fight, Daniel said, newfound determination in his voice. Not to hurt Tiffany, but to establish boundaries that protect Sophie. To break the cycle. And you? I asked gently. What do you want for yourself in all this? He considered the question, perhaps for the first time in years. Peace. The chance to be a better father than I've been. To rebuild what I've damaged. Including with me? Elena asked quietly. Daniel reached across the table, taking his sister's hand. Especially with you. I'm sorry, Elena. For everything. For choosing Tiffany's approval over your honesty. For shutting you out when you were just trying to protect me. Elena squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. Water under the bridge, little brother. The weeks that followed brought challenges and surprises. The Hartleys' influence proved substantial, but not unlimited. Daniel's evidence, particularly the videos, swayed the initial hearings decisively in his favor. Temporary primary custody was granted to him, with Tiffany allowed supervised visitation pending a full evaluation. The most unexpected development came from Tiffany herself. Faced with the unraveling of her carefully controlled world, separated from her daughter, and her parents' unquestioning support, something shifted. During the third supervised visit, after Sophie had shown her a drawing made at Grandpa's house, Tiffany had broken down. She admitted she needs help, Daniel told me afterward, wonder in his voice. She talked about her own childhood, things I'd only heard pieces of before. The discipline, the impossibly high standards. She started therapy. Do you think there's hope for reconciliation? I asked carefully. Daniel shook his head slowly. As a family unit? No. Too much has happened. But as co-parents who might someday heal enough to work together for Sophie's sake? Maybe. Spring arrived, melting the last traces of Mr. Buttons from the yard. Sophie bloomed in the warmth of unconditional love, her anxiety receding, her natural exuberance returning. She still saw her mother weekly, now in a neutral setting with a family counselor present. Some visits went better than others, but small steps of progress were visible. Daniel found a small house to rent just a few blocks from mine, close enough for daily visits, but establishing the independence he needed to rebuild his life. He took a leave of absence from the high-pressure law firm where Tiffany's father's influence had launched his career, accepting a temporary position with a nonprofit serving disadvantaged children. Less money, he acknowledged when I asked about the change, but I sleep better at night. Elena extended her stay, then eventually returned to Chicago, but with regular video calls and plans for Sophie to visit over the summer. The broken bridges of our family were being carefully reconstructed, stronger for having been rebuilt with intention rather than obligation. On a warm afternoon in late May, I sat on the back porch, watching Sophie and Daniel planting a vegetable garden in my backyard. Sophie gleefully patting dirt around tomato seedlings, Daniel patiently showing her how to water them properly. The garden had been Martha's domain once. After her death, I'd let it go, too painful to tend to something that had been so completely hers. Now it was coming back to life under new, smaller hands. "Grandpa," Sophie called out, "come see. I planted carrots for Mr. Buttons when he comes back next winter." I joined them in the soft dirt, kneeling despite protesting knees. "That's perfect, sunshine. He'll need a new nose by then." Daniel caught my eye over Sophie's head, a world of unspoken understanding passing between us. We had both failed, and been failed. We had both lost our way, and found it again. And now we were building something new from the broken pieces. Not perfect, but real. Not flawless, but honest. "You know," Daniel said as we worked side by side, Sophie having moved on to gleefully watering the lettuce, "I keep thinking about what you said that night at the birthday dinner." "What's that?" "You don't deserve this child," he quoted softly. "You were right. I didn't deserve her. Not the way I was living, not the person I was becoming. But I'm trying to deserve her now. Every day." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not just the man he was, or the boy he had been, but the father he was. Becoming. Strong enough to be gentle. Brave enough to be vulnerable. Wise enough to know he was still learning. You're already succeeding, I told him, and meant it. As the afternoon sun warmed the newly planted garden, Sophie's laughter floating on the spring breeze, I thought of Martha and what she would say about all that had happened, about the family that had fractured and was now healing in new configurations, about the hard-won wisdom that comes only through pain and the courage to face it. Family isn't who shares your table when the room is full, I murmured to myself, watching Sophie dance with the garden hose, soaking her shoes and not caring one bit. It's who carries you inside when the world turns cold. Daniel glanced over. What was that, Dad? I smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. Just something your mother would have said, about what really matters in the end. Not wealth or status or appearances, not perfect obedience or unbroken rules. Just love. Messy, honest, enduring love. The kind that carries you home,